rot to their hooves.
No, this is a back, we call it, yes, now, a muscle spasm.
Oh,
A muscle spasm.
that sounds like early onset rigor mortis.
That's correct. Go, go to the head of the class.
Roshna, you never hear about snake oil?
Snake
No,
oil?
I've never heard about that.
No, I hear about snake oil, and I see on YouTube and thing, or Facebook, women with snake oil and thing, how they gyrating.
There is a calypso song like that though, but I've never
Yeah,
heard about that being used medicinally and stuff.
like the PNM senator who is
Oh gosh.
who making waves now. Yeah, so they have her walking and they're showing how she the move she has.
All right. Well, we're gonna go into the meeting now. So I'm gonna close the parking lot until the end. Mutilal, welcome. Okay, welcome to Poetry and Prose. Thank you for joining us. It is the 6th of April, 2025, and we are happy to host today. I will be the host for today. Our setup is just a little different. While I'm hosting, I also have our featured guest on my phone. So if there's any reason you're not hearing him, please let me know. If you're having any technical difficulties, please let me know. Our meeting today, we're going to start off with a presentation, and then we're going to go into a bit of a discussion, and then the floor will be open for an open mic. If you received the program, you'll see that it's just a little bit differently organized. I didn't put a list of readers. I figure if you brought something to read, I can do round robin and we can just call on you. Okay, so that's what to expect. And I'm going to go right into the meeting. We are honored to host the Grand Chief, Eric Lewis, to lead a presentation of the history of the First People. The Grand Chief, Eric Lewis, was appointed as the Prince of Moruga, and that's a title meaning minor chief, by the Grand Chief Paul Navarro in 2011. Under Navarro's guidance, Eric was trained in the indigenous language, herbal knowledge, and practice of ceremonial traditions. He is well versed in the First People, and he's currently leading the First People as the Grand Chief. Eric, sir, thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to learning all we can from you. I must admit, this is a very selfish endeavor, because other than what I learned in school, well, I wouldn't say what year, but a while ago, about the Caribs and Arawaks, that's basically all I would know. So I look forward to your presentation. Please welcome to Poetry and Prose. We're a very relaxed group, and so we can have one-on-one conversations quite easily.
All right, so my greetings to all of you would be Ya Karibiada Kokotuka, and your response, wherever you are, would be Jakeda.
Jakeda.
And Ya Karibiada would mean welcome, blessings, goodness, all good things to you, all good favors to you. And it's a greeting in the plural for a group of persons. And Jakeda or Yakeda means all blessings, all goodness to you. All is good with me, all is good with you, everything is good. It's beautiful, everything is beautiful, and all is well. It's one of the most beautiful, well, two of the most beautiful words. It's, like it has that weight of namaste to it. Yes, and thank you again for the introduction. I liked I like the fact that you give me a nice little introduction. Good enough. And apart from being the chief of the First Peoples and before being the Prince of Moruga, I also worked heavily in archaeology and studied quite a bit of history, both in Trinidad and Mexico, in Mexico, particularly for the indigenous history and indigenous heritage, indigenous cultures, and also in other parts of Latin America. Well, what is called Latin America, and that too is contended to among some of our indigenous communities. In today's presentation, I'd like to really focus on our indigenous culture, indigenous history here in Trinidad, and which also relates to Venezuela and the islands as well, and as far as Peru, and there's good reason for that. First, I'd like to start with my own ancestry and our end here. So I recently had a DNA test done, and in the DNA test came up that I also have Incan ancestry, which to me was a big surprise. Apart from me being related to many of the indigenous groups of South America, from everywhere of South America, that is, so from all the way from the great Incan Empire all the way back to the Warao here in Venezuela, and that would include Bolivia and all the way down to Argentina and Paraguay, etc. So the Amazonian people are also my relatives in my ancient ancestry. Yes, today, now, in this time, I'm of mixed descent, so I also have some African ancestry, some East Indian ancestry, Myanmar ancestry, and some European ancestry. However, in the succession, it only takes 1% of your bloodline that you continue. And whether or not it's very strong or weak, it's a successive chieftaincy that I would have followed, being passed on to me or succeeding from Paul Navarro. So immediately after Chief Paul Navarro's death, immediately I had to assume, by council approval, of course, the chieftaincy as acting chief immediately upon his death. And that was the most difficult thing that I had to do in my entire life. So the preparation for the chief's passing, which is where I would begin here now in our history, had to do with a whole lot of ancient ceremonies, because we hadn't known any grand chief to have died in our century, and again, even whatever would have happened past the last century, like in the 1800s or 17 or 1600s, we wouldn't know, because the records it's difficult. So it took like extra research. We had to collaborate with other groups from different parts of the world to prepare this chief's final rites. And most of it, I had to preside over as a Cacique Sanutidaha Waratuma. And that means as a small chief or a young chief, as I was introduced in the early time as the prince. And that was very difficult for me, because this would be the first time that I'm conducting a grand ceremony in the absence of the grand chief and in his absence. So I had to call council meetings, and that too was difficult, because you had all these other groups and different tribes from different parts of the world giving me all these different directions and guidelines, and everyone kept saying, and don't forget this part, and don't forget this piece, and don't forget that you have to get this and you have to get that. So we were back into the forest, finding the incense wood, finding the trees, finding the herbs to prepare for the Grand Chief ceremony. And interestingly, many of the items started coming in before his passing. What do I mean? How is this done? Now, as in our culture of this indigenous heritage, right, in this South culture, now other groups do things differently. I respect that. And there are different groups, etc. Now, the way that we have to do things, it's passed on for us generationally. So, for example, I couldn't go get fake feathers for my headpiece, number one. Two, you're not allowed to kill the bird or the hawk for that type of ceremonial, those types of ceremonies and rituals. So nature must gift it to you. What does that mean? It means that the bird must die on its own. It means that if you're wearing any teeth or any bones, those would have had to die a natural death on its own without you harming this animal or creature. So when that was passed on to me, I was like, then there's no way possible that I'll be able to wear a nice feather headpiece or have any bones, because how is this going to happen? But then so fate had it that one night I was driving home, well, driving from one estate to the next, and there in the road was one of the gabelans, which we call gabelan hawks, the black hawk in the road, a black and white. And I was like, wow, where did this come from? How did this appear? Now, all of this is before the death of the chief. So while the chief was sick, this happened. And I got that. Some years before, I dreamt that I was swimming with a whale at sea. And amongst that whale, so apart from the whale that I was saving or swimming with, there was 8 other whales out in the ocean, which was like looking on. And some of them were closer to the shore, some of them were further back. Anyway, I thought it was the most stupidest dream of my life. I said, how could this even be possible that I would dream that I'm swimming with whales? Because I tried to be present in my intuition and in my realm as chief and as prince and all of that in the indigenous world. I tried to keep, I tried to interpret my dreams. I tried to think what it might be, or perhaps I might have had a bad diet. As we say sometimes in Trinidad, we probably ate too much, so we have a bad dream. But I mean, this dream was special because everything in the dream felt real. And I felt like a lesson. And I woke up the next morning and I was upset because I said, number one, I live in Moruga. I'm in Trinidad. I had, the only one experience I had with any whale ever was collecting some whale bones for the Moruga Museum. Apart from that, I had never seen, when I went to Disneyland and stuff like that, I saw whales. But apart from that, I had never seen a whale in the wild. I've never interacted with any other whales outside of that. 3 days after that dream, I received a phone call that, hey, Prince, there's a whale on the beach. Come see if you could save this whale or see what's wrong with it. And immediately, the memory of the dream came back to me. I got dressed in some beach clothes, and the exact clothes that I was wearing was the same clothes that I was wearing in the dream. The exact spot that they said to me that the whale was is the exact spot that I dreamt that the whale would be in the dream. While I was preparing to go swim, the beach attendant said to me, hey, be careful because the waves are, the currents, pushing this way and that way. And again, immediately I remembered the dream that the currents were pushing. And I said, all right, thank you. I know what to do. And I know where the wheel is now because in the dream, it was like up in between the mangroves in a particular area, like almost stuck there. Well, and the murky water, everything was according to that. No, I didn't have time to reminisce on any dream anymore. It's like time to save this whale, get to work, focus, pay attention. And I knew what to do based on the dream. So I got in there, swam out at sea. Not all the way out at sea, swam around to the mangroves, and I got there. And I remember in the dream that I was talking to the whale, that I said to the whale, be calm, I'm going to take care of you, everything's going to be okay. So I did exactly that. But I guess it was more so to give me that encouragement to take care of it. Now, this is a nice story, but it has a lot of meaning to it afterwards. So I'll get into the meaning of it after. So I did that. I got the wheel out. I swam out the wheel at sea. It was like a movie. I must admit it was a fantastic, amazing experience. All the way out at sea. Then I get out at sea and then I was like, hey, now the wheel is out at sea. Now I let the wheel, I leave the wheel to go on its own. I see it swimming well. And then I'm thinking, oh, no, I have to swim back to shore. I didn't make a consideration of that. So I was all the way out there. And I was like, anyway, in the dream, I didn't die. So I'm not going to die having to swim back to shore now. So I got back to shore, continued on my way now, looked at the way go on out. I didn't wave it goodbye because I knew you can't see me anymore. And I'm gone off, about my normal life, just reminiscing on what just happened. A few hours later, after nightfall, I received another phone call. Prince, there is a dead whale on the beach. I said, no, there can't be any dead whale on the beach. I said, I already saved a whale earlier on. It turned it out to sea. The whale is good, and it's fine. They said, no, it's not fine. The police is here. The police asked that you come and do whatever you have to do. If you are retrieving it, whatever it is that you have to do. And, so hope to see you soon. Then I was like, what happened? I got there and I could see that the whale was harpooned to its side with a laceration to the side and some blood running out there. Now, what happened is that I really did see a fishing boat out at sea, so I could only blame someone, a fisherman possibly, for harpooning the whale and sticking it to its side, which would have caused the whale to bleed and die. So then, the end of that, I retrieved the whale, took it back to my repository, and basically intended to keep to do analysis on it, taxidermy on the whale, and some assessment on the whale to see what would be the cause of death, etc., which I did. And so after doing that, basically we could take scalp all the flesh off and prepare the bones for housing it at the museum, in the museum storage. Well, that in itself was a process. Among that were the teeth and the whale teeth, etc. So anyway, that story is closed off. I was really disappointed. And the next day I felt like a complete failure and I blamed myself a lot. At that same time, that same week, we had a chiefs meeting, a national chiefs meeting, and there were also some other chiefs outside of Trinidad. So it was an international chiefs meeting with me accompanying the Grand Chief as the Prince of Muruga at that time to this meeting. And I met the other chiefs and I said, hey, I had an experience over the last week. I explained it to them. And then they said to me, well, you're being prepared for something grand and to save something. And, it's a great sign. And the whale, and I asked, well, why did the whale have to die? Because I already saved it. I risked my life saving the whale. Again, I was really upset. And they said this was a test, one, of your endurance, your fortitude, and a sign that you would have troubles to go through and that you would come out, you would be successful and victorious at the end of it. And I said, but why did the whale have to die? And why did it come back to me? He said, the whale came back to you because it's a gift from the goddess of the sea. So in the indigenous world, in the Amerindian world, in this sense, and I'm using the term Amerindian in this speech, which we don't usually use, right? But I'm using it in this context for our listeners. They said to me that this is a gift and it's to prepare you and for you to always remember the hardships of the chieftaincy, of nature, of God, of preserving life. And even after we would have preserved life, that there is death after. And whether dead or alive, to treasure life, because in it also has treasures. So I was like, what do you mean there are treasures? They said, well, the bones from the whale teeth would become a gift to you for your princehood in becoming chief. And then I was like, I didn't think about that, but it's always going to remind me, although I'm decorated in the whale teeth, that it's always going to remind me of death, of struggle, of sacrifice, of risk, of hardship, and again, on the unknown, because I had no idea of what's going to happen. So they explained all of that to me. I still wasn't satisfied because I'm thinking, well, why did nature and why did these ancient spirits then have to set me up like this to go through all of this? And then still a big thing like a whale, it's not, and it's such a glorious animal that it still had to die, what, for me or for a point or for what? I still couldn't grasp it all. However, with the other chiefs explaining it again, I gradually accepted the fate that the whale had to suffer and the bit I had to suffer too, because it was not easy. And I wore the necklace for the first time the year of the Grand Chief's unveiling of the statue here in Muruga. And him and I wore some of it. So I wore some of that whale teeth and he also wore some. And again, it reminded me of all of these things that these other chiefs spoke about. Like there were chiefs from Suriname, Guyana, Venezuela, those other chiefs in Trinidad. At that time, all of us were one almost, well, at least in meetings. in the political realm of the chieftaincies. Anyway, we'll get into that later on. And so that continued, that story continued with the whale teeth now being one of my main signs. And that was to show also nature's, my vibration with nature, the ancestors and the environment. And the second time now, I would wear that really now officially in an official capacity. All the whale teeth would be at the death of the Grand Chief and for his funeral ceremony. So then that became like, my big sign then from nature, because one of the second thing is that as a chief or incoming chief, the next thing is that nature should be in tandem with you, or you should be in tandem with nature and the environment. So you should receive gifts in that way. You should receive, nature should receive you. You should be able to, be well with the animals and the snakes and the plants and, the wildest species that exist there, even dogs that's domesticated. There should be some natural connection or supernatural connection between you and that. And that's part of my personal experience. That's part of my story. It wasn't just my own experience, but to many of the people here in Muruga, that's something that you could see also online when we were saving whales in Muruga. You could Google that, whale beaching in Muruga. And the other things that I dreamt in that dream with the other whales, guess what? As time went by, I interacted with the other whales, the next whale, a few other whales came in after that, amounting to the 9 whales in total, which for me was, sort of like a miracle in that sense. So, sorry, I hope I didn't bore you all with that piece of of my story, but that's part of my story, and that's how nature worked with me. Now, our indigenous heritage and indigenous culture, though it was set to be oppressed and downtrodden by the Europeans, not just by Columbus himself. Now, I want to get into that one time as well. So that's my introduction to me and my relationship with that, right? So keeping in mind Columbus's voyage 1498, the encounter with the New World. And it's said from the Trinidad Espanol, which is one of my favorite history books. And because it's a compilation of history, the compilation of Trinidad's history and other Caribbean islands' history and the Americas, which was put together by the Spanish themselves, and not a history that was put together by the Europeans. So I'm just going to read some names for you all and call out some names. So Columbus had an objective of finding this new world and new passes, etc. And there are different books and different theories about it. One of them is
we're losing audio there. We're having some difficulties with the audio. Gush?
Hi.
We're having some difficulties with the audio. I am. I don't know the others.
Okay. Let me see if I can raise the volume on my phone just a bit.
He was breaking up a little bit on my end too.
Okay. Do you want to try again a little more?
Let him go back. Let him backtrack to the 1498 when he talked about 1498 Columbus.
Yes.
Backtrack to that.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. I actually had just moved a bit to get my other books here and just in front of me because I have some quotes that I want to read. One of the books is Trinidad Espanol or Spanish Trinidad by Francisco Morales Padron, and also Los Sin Dios, a Native American War Manual by Ricardo Ignacio. And another book which also helps our herbal knowledge, which I still have to always add because there are always remedies and always secret ancient remedies that we still have to learn, would be Native American Herbalism by Miguela Sanchez. And then we have the other Trinidad contemporary history books, which I wouldn't give them 100%, but I would give them a fair rating. Towns and Villages of Trinidad by Michael Anthony, which gives, and keep in mind, Michael Anthony says that it's a story, it's a story. So, he pardoned himself in the beginning of his book by saying that. And another one, The Making of the West Indies, by F.R. Auger and S.C. Gordon. So
Auger and Gordon.
Sources of West Indian History. Anyway.
Hi,
So
1 minute. Krishna, you said something?
Yeah, The Making of the West Indies by Auger. Well, we used to say Auger and Gordon.
Hold on, recount.
Okay.
Did you hear that, Eric?
Auger.
Yeah.
Auger and Gordon. Yes.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the correction. Right. So those are some of them. I mean, those others are old, and you can still get some, moderate history out of it. But I like to refer to this one that I'm reading from here now. So it says in page 6, chapter 2. They did not operate at random. Instead, they had clearly defined objectives of widening and elongating Columbus's American world. Alonso de Ojeda, 1499, Pero Alonso Niño, and Cristobal Guerra, 1499, Vincent Yanez Pinzo, 1500, Diego de Lepe, 1499 to 1500, and Pinzo with Solis in 1508 repeated Columbus's trajectory in Trinidadian waters, except for Niño, Guerra, and Lepe. The others entered through the Serpent's Mouth and exited through the Dragons in search of the island of Margarita. The men on board these ships of exploration were professionals of the sea, sailing and advancing patrols, opening America to the American conquerors. Trinidad, for that reason, did not play a major role in the annals of that time. It did not have pearls and therefore did not entice these explorers. Trinidad and its inhabitants gained their initial appeal when the Crown authorized in 1516 the enslavement of the indigenous people perceived as fierce. The well-known story of Geronimite friars not allowing Father Las Casas to sail. Now, I'm just interjecting here. Father Las Casas is Bartolomeu de Las Casas, and he was one of the major scribes, and for us, one of the most important scribes of where indigenous history and heritage were, where indigenous heritage were recorded at the time, right? To sail in their same ship that had left Spain for the Indies, interlinked with Trinidad on the island of Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico was also the vice province for Trinidad in 1516, just to share with you all. The Geronimite Fathers, Geronimite Fathers is a different order of the priesthood of the Catholic Church. And Bartolomeu de Las Casas, he was Dominican. This is also my sharing with you. In San Lucas, Spain, and again, later in Puerto Rico, to sail on their ship, in San Luca, they alleged that Las Casas would travel more comfortably in another ship, etc., coming to Trinidad. Long story short, we're jumping over to 1520. So why am I making mention of this? So in our heads, or in our minds, and in our history, we were taught that Columbus came by here in Trinidad, came ashore, landed here in 1498, claimed the island in the name of Spain, and so they started immediately conquering the island. This is not so, and this is one of the biggest misleading stories of our country's history, because all of that time, Trinidad was still uninhabited or untouched still, to most of it, and all of it by the European conquistadors. It wasn't until the 1520s that permission was given, and I'm reading here now, I'm quoting, by the Governor Royal and the Captain General in 1520, that that the first governor and the first pathway was opened up for Trinidad to be conquered in 1520. However, it was not easy. Antonio Sedano's Royal Charter first initiates that it began in 1530, although he does not appear in the original sources to be initially involved. And the exact date that is shared in this book here, and page 90 now of same chapter 2, the Council of the Indies letter dates 3rd of January 1530 acknowledges Sedano's request to colonize Trinidad. From this letter and from the charter's text, one may conclude that Sedano's objective was based on gold and on the Amerindians of the island. That letter appears to be from January, but the charter has a July date. The Royal Charter reveals that Antonio Sedano informed royal officials that Trinidad Amerindians were anthropomorphous and therefore had been declared worthy of enslaving. It would not have been any clearer. Sedano expected to capture these people and to sell them in the markets of the Caribbean. At that time, incursions in search of native labor were prevalent throughout the Caribbean. European ships departed islands, ports like hunters that harassed the coastal zone of the mainland Venezuela and docked in unarmed beaches where, through cunning deceit of violence, captured the Amerindians. Now, during this time, I'm sharing now out from my own ancestors' history here now. Antonio Sedano, according to this book, is one of the most violent, atrocious, inhumane characters of the time during the 1500s. So we're keeping the date 1530. And we're also keeping in mind Columbus did not pass by Trinidad here with 3 ships, based on this book also. And that there was a lot of disparity even amongst the Europeans themselves because they were fighting for their own internal power. What did that do with the indigenous community? So there were those who actually saw and believed that our indigenous people were, real important and live human beings. And amongst the Europeans, there were those who believed that they were savage, that they were creatures less than humans, that they didn't have a soul. And they didn't have spirituality, that they ate their children. The Caribs ate people, or the Caribs, and that they were cannibals, sorry. And during that time, they made the most atrocious stories, the most amount of lies to be able to enslave, because at the same time, the same Isabella was not in agreement for the enslavement of for the indigenous population, which they call the Amerindians at the time. And that basically spurred some, as we'll say in Trinidad, some bacchanal and contention even amongst the Europeans, because Sedano wanted slaves to be sold to different parts of different islands, and they were looking for money even through that, and they wanted free labor as well. Anyways, what we have been looking at also is the migratory process by the indigenous people. And nowadays we know Trinidad, we know Venezuela as the mainland, etc. Trinidad was called Kyrie, not because it meant land of the hummingbird, but because it meant island, right? And this is according to the Kalinago language, which we still have preserved, still a lot of it still preserved. And so, even that misconception that we were called the land of the hummingbird, it wasn't true. And the deception of the Europeans, and I want to read this one part here. Sedano attempted to convince this guy called Herrera that there was riches at hand in the Caribbean, in Trinidad here. And he really tried to make up a whole big story that there was a lot of gold and the El Dorado so that people would be more interested, right? Anyway, he did get some leeway on that. And another one is that this is what we were not taught about our ancestors in school or in any history book that I've read from Trinidad's writing or from anybody else, Michael Anthony or Dr. Eric Williams, or even those 2 other guys that I read spoke about. And our country, our ancestors' history, seeing that so no, there were no fights, the indigenous people didn't fight back, they just, let the Europeans come in. Yes, our ancestors welcomed them, fed them, gave them water, and hosted them very well, and even food, and even housed them as well when some of these Europeans came. And so did the deceit of this island begin. However, at the time, there were still chiefs who were cautious about these Europeans. For example, Chief Bukamari, right, and another chief, Maruana. So Chief Bukamari was in opposition of the European presence in Trinidad. Chief Maruana was in agreement and peaceful that we should accept the Spanish presence. So with all of this in mind, Chief Maruana approached Sideno, or Sideno would have been staying in his camp or his house, and basically sold out our indigenous chiefs or other chiefs like Chief Bukamari and the others, and told them that, listen, Chief Bukamari wants to plan a fight and a rival against you all. And this basically was the start of the first war on the island of Kyrie, which basically comprised of chiefs from mainland Venezuela and all of Trinidad, all parts of the Kyrie, the island of Trinidad. And this war broke out and lasted for a few years. For almost 4 years, our indigenous ancestors fought for the land that they called home and that the land that they belonged to. So I would like you to observe that we didn't say that the land belonged to us, but we belonged to the land. Now, even in that time, the indigenous community had their own government in the sense of the setup of chiefs, a grand chief, and the grand chief here was Chief Bukamari. Under Chief Bukamari, there were several other chiefs, which I can call some names right now. Chief Guina, Chief Diamana, Chief Utayani, Chief Amanati, Chief Paraguini, Chief Pamakoa, and Chief Diamana. They were leader chiefs and they were also warrior chiefs in the same capacity. And above them all was the Grand Chief, Chief Bukamari. And he's also written of in the books by Castellanos, 1040, according to one of Castellanos' poem. He was one of the scribes for the Europeans. And this was our country, and I would say that those names of those chiefs that I just called out there, they would be this island's first heroes and first defenders of the land. And why I'm making mention of this is because they're not spoken of, they're not spoken about, they're not even mentioned amongst other indigenous groups. They don't even know about them. And today, when you look at Trinidad's history, all you hear about is Chief Hyarima. Chief Hyarima was in the 16th century, just at the close of the 16th century. And he was also one of the Nipoyo chiefs from the south. Basically, they have him being from the Nabarima side here. So from Nabarima would be San Fernando, all the way back to Princestown. But anyway, so I give recognition and honor to Chief Bukamari in my presentation, which I'm sharing with you today, and to all the ancestor chiefs whom I mentioned earlier on. For he said while they were fighting, and I'm reading this poem, and I'm really happy for this audience because it's in tune with, I've adjusted what I'm saying in tune with your audience. And this is the poem that was written by Castellanos, 1014, if ever you want to look it up. Pointing to Castellan, he shouted, "It seems to you, the island, a beautiful thing, and your desire swells to the measure. They are to die for taking control of it, and not to make waste of their arrival. Yet for you, having driven us out of it, it is suitable for us that without fear to lose our lives, for it is better to die once and for all than to die 100,000 times day by day." Chief Bukamari. So they fought with all their might, all their power, everything that they had. So much so that the Spaniards said, these people, or not people, these indigenous, these Amerindians fight as if they have a soul, as if at the end of their life, they would give up their souls. So even in those contexts, it did not consider them humans or equals or even having a soul. So for them to be converted was not even a first priority at first. However, religion, the Catholic religion, was introduced to them for their indoctrination, for their culturalization, and for their conversion after all of these fights of 1534. Sedano's supporters were ultimately victorious, so they say. In January 1534, Sedano was in a precarious situation. They did not even have boats. They lacked ships for their boats, and the canoes needed their canoes needed caulking. He sent a request for shoes, cotton, paper, etc., etc. And so in 1534, the Spaniards began taking, going through different parts of Trinidad, having little ceremonies, writing a paper, having whoever chief would be present, minor chiefs would be present there, and basically having them witness to their own agreements. It wasn't a mutual agreement, it was a partial agreement because it was only for the European side that they would now take over the island in the name of Spain. And so that history continued to the demise of the indigenous community. And I would stop there based on that book. And now I would continue sharing from my other knowledge that, continue there from there on. So from that time, so 1534, they started going around capturing, so what the Europeans did is that they went to the same villages that was established by the indigenous people, Princestown, which is called Savannah Grande, Moruga, Ziparia. Ziparia was spelled with a Z at the time, so it's Z, starting with Z. Moruga had a I in it, Moruiga, so it was more so pronounced like Moruiga, right? And Ziparia was more so pronounced like Ziparia. Aruca was pronounced more so like Aruaca, right? And Arima, now Arima, for Nabarima here in San Fernando, etc. And Tau Cariba and Ma Mukarapo, which is Mukarapo. So I also noticed that in our country's present text, the way that places names are spelled, the way that it's written today, it basically gives us, it cheats us and it robs us of our identity and even in translating the meaning. So what I've been doing also is finding the meaning or the different language meanings to some of these word names, and two of our very popular and most popular ones. I would start with Arima. So Arima, as you know, is called a place of much water or plenty water, or where water is plentiful or in abundance. Now, what I have realized in the Warao language, which is said that the Waraos inhabited the Nabarima, which I don't 100% agree. Just keep that in a note, and I will explain all of that to you why after as we go along. Now, in the 1500s, there were no mention of any tribe being called Warao amongst any of the books or any of the texts that I have read. None. However, what I can gather from some of the information that I have read so far is that even in the 1500s, 1600s, the indigenous people who settled on the northern side of Venezuela were basically considered Caribs also. My ancestors went back to Venezuela, came back to Trinidad, back and forth. Some of them went up to Margarita, came back to Trinidad again. Then some of my other ancestors came down to the Americas, which are the Incan set, and also conquered and married, well, not married, crossbred or had relations with these other indigenous here. And so in my indigenous ancestry, I'm very mixed because of all the different migratory process as well as internal indigenous, affairs that would have taken place over the centuries or so on among them. And my Incan ancestry is also the highest part of it. And there was only one record where they weren't certain, where the Europeans were not certain that the Incas were really in the Americas in the Caribbean, which was recorded by Sideno and Valquez, that they said the indigenous people, the Amerindians at the time, at the northern coast of Venezuela, said that they had that other men dressed with cloth, lots of gold, with rings in their nose, in their ears, and really nice feathers, that they came and they had a fight with them, and that they had affairs with their children. Well, I mean with their wives, sorry, and so had descendants coming down on this side. And apart from that, that was the only mention of it. And so even when the Europeans found that out, they got to realize that some of the indigenous tribes started mixing, and some of the indigenous tribes that they thought did not reach as far as they did were actually already in the Caribbean, as well as what we call the Caribs, the Kalinago and the Tiano, Caribs and Arabs, or the Locono. And amongst that were other tribes too. So it wasn't just the Caribs and Arabs that were in Trinidad. It had the Kalinago, the Taino, the Loconos, the Capun, and several other tribes. And here in Trinidad, you could break them down to tribes and nations. So nations would be groups of tribes that would create a nation of people. And then you also had clans also existing in different parts of the island, and then, being even ruled by a chief. So the chief would also, the name of the space would be the name that the chief would give it. How am I saying this? All right, so the Chaguanis people, which is now called Chaguanas in Trinidad, was run by the chief, Chaguanis. There was another chief called Chief Murquito, and in Murga, we have a place called Murquit River, which was named after him. In other parts of Venezuela, same happened there. In Port of Spain, where you have Ma Mucarapo, the chief was Chief Mucarapo, which was for that entire Port of Spain area. And that area would also include spaces like the Red House, Woodford Square, and all the way back to the river. And where the cathedral is was actually the end of the sea front was just to the front of the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception Roman Catholic Cathedral, heading backwards to Lavantil areas, etc. Woody Hills that was also inhabited by the indigenous people. And in all those little areas, you had little fights and wars and big fights and big wars, and hence the reason why your Red House is buried on was built on an Amerindian burial ground. After they assassinated them, they buried them there. Same with some of the churches. Princestown Church was also built at the chief's residence. The chief residence was at Classic Street, Princestown. Why am I so sure about this? Well, apart from the records, I also did archaeology in that area in 2013 into 2014, and we unearthed an Amerindian site there, and that area is where the chief would live. And even the Princestown market was an ancient indigenous market where the indigenous people would come through from Muruga, make their footpath all the way into Princestown, and do their trade there at that Princestown market. So that market is not a market that's new. Neither the roadways or the pathways that leads from Muruga to Princestown or Siparia to San Fernando and some of the areas in Chaguanas, right? Now the area in Chaguanas had a whole lot of swamp areas, etc. So the Europeans are the ones who basically made over those new roads, but much of these south roads are some of the original, some of those north roads from Mucarapo to St. Joseph, that's an original one as well. And where the St. Joseph Park is, and to the back of the church was also a next big massacre site there. Then you have San Rafael de Arenales, which is, how do you call this in present day? San Rafael, right. San Rafael was also another massacre site. Muruga also had a revolt as well in the same 1699, when you had the Spanish, the Capuchin, the Franciscan Capuchin monks amongst them, you also had lay brothers who were not fully priests yet, and they were basically responsible for the conversion of the indigenous population and the indoctrination and a culturalization with the Spanish customs and norms and the Spanish education, etc. Now, even during that time, as smooth as it seemed, there in the 1600s, then there was that next revolt in the Arena Massacre, which is the San Rafael. So you had where they were building this church, and then again came some of our chiefs and leaders who basically had already planned to kill the priest, the Roman Catholic priest. They killed the two of the priests, one of the lay brothers, and then they had also, well, they had already known that the governor is going to want to kill them. So they basically plotted to kill the governor and his entourage while they were coming in, and so they were successful at that. So after that was done, you know what the consequence was. So the consequence at the time was to kill every one of those indigenous warriors, as well as the people who inhabited that land. So they basically rounded them up, take them up to St. Joseph, and had them in that big Amerindian house, like thatched roofed and all these things around and the wood, etc. And they lit them all on fire. Quite a number of persons died. I think it was like over 70 or 80 persons would have been gathered in that space in St. Joseph, San Jose de Oruna. So, it carries every time I meditate or study these texts or digest it, it's a lot of passion and a hurt that goes with it and in it. And then today I'm like a person who retrails and backtrails, like on a hunting expedition to find the artifacts and to find the history and whatever little written history that exists of our ancestors exists. However, I've also inherited some really good oral history and oral tradition coming from the old chief, as well as being passed on to me from my grandparents as well. So my great-grandmother, who was Utakia Treya Machan, she also sent messages for us. And by the way, she was born in 1850. And she died at 109. She died at 109. And she was the aunt of Paul Navarro, the Grand Chief Paul Navarro. Her mother's sister was the first Carib queen in Arima in the 1800s, thereabout as well. And even during their time, the older one of their husbands was the chief at the time. Now, so you see where I'm going with this on our country's indigenous heritage, etc., and this type of history, and to where we were at and to where we are today. And so to restrain our indigenous people, to restrain the chiefs from fighting and to have less power, a queen was chosen from amongst the people by the church and state, so that there would be no more fights against the church or against the state by installing a queen for the Santa Rosa First Peoples. How did that even happen in the first place? So after that fight that we spoke about in 1699, then you come into the 1700s there, sorry. And in the 1700s, they wanted to put a grip on things, and they're coming in the 1700s, you had the British. So transition from the Spanish to the British. And with that, now, the British had a nice plan, and they worked well with the church. You keep in mind that the British are the ones who sponsored the Roman Catholic Cathedral construction and funded it also. And so the church and state married again. At the same time, the church was really initiated, the Catholic Church was initiated by the Spanish presence here, and they made their deals and their negotiations to keep Corpus Christi if they allow the British to take over the island, according to Don Jose Maria Chacon. Anyway, change hands to the British. So the British came up with strategy. They used strategy, alliance, to get the Amerindians to also defend the parts of the island And this is something that they had learned from the Spanish. So even during the Spanish time, the Spanish had given the indigenous people horses so that they would be able to guard the ports, that the indigenous people would also be able to guard the borders of the island and be able to get back to Port of Spain quickly. Well, not Port of Spain, San Jose. And during that time, the Amerindians were very well articulate now, by that time, speaking Spanish, as well as understanding the Spanish version of defense, which they also used to, for the benefit of the Spanish people. So in the while the British were taking over, all of these alliances and allegiances basically transferred to them at most parts. Long story short, during that time now, you had the installation now of this queen in Arima, again, our relative. And this would now weaken the indigenous community with the lack of not having a chief serve this island in that heavy capacity from the 1800s to the early 1900s. Now, there was another chief whom Chief Paul Navarro had succeeded, whose name I do not know, but there was some fight here in Trinidad. He came to Moruga, and from Moruga, he met with the chief's family here in Moruga and went back to Venezuela. And then Chief Paul Navarro went to Venezuela, met the other indigenous there, and so they installed him there, and then he came back here and continued, etc. But not as, not popular, not in the media, not on the anything of the sort. But anyway, so he continued in his, calm way until our time period which would be now, that, I don't know, some people said I have made it, polished and make it look like nice and good. It's not, it's not always like that. But yeah, so I inherited this time. Now, what did the establishment of the Santa Rosa community do? Yes, the church worked with them to keep some of the cultural aspects of it alive. And why is it called Santa Rosa? Because Saint Rose of Lima was one of the first indigenous person of indigenous descent, as well as European and some small bits of African descent. No, not African, only indigenous and European descent, to actually be made a saint back then in those days. Now there was some myths of her appearing in Santa Rosa, blah, 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 blah. And so, they all remain myths and stories now and legends. But I mean, now that story has faded quite a lot when people have done investigation with St. Rose of Lima being present in Arima when she never really came here. Some person said that she was on her way her family was on her way to Europe traveling, and they basically passed by here in Trinidad and continued on, etc. So the Santa Rosa aspect of it was basically installed which the claim made is to preserve the heritage of the indigenous people, while at the same time it was to oppress any uprising by the indigenous people to retake their lands or to stand up against the Europeans, as earlier discussed. And so today we continue our struggles for, I shouldn't say recognition. I think we have made that abundantly clear over the past few years that, we are still here, that descendants of us are still here. I'm not saying that we are here to go take over the land, or to say to people of African descent, hey, get off of our land, or people of East Indian descent to get off of the land. No, it's not. That's not the way, and that's not the way that we should go, or the way that we should be, or that we should go tell the state, hey, give us back all these properties and powers, etc. No. But in today's world, my plan is to see a cohesive coexistence of the indigenous people of indigenous descent or indigenous descended, that they too can have an equal right, as said in our country's national anthem, where every creed and race finds with an S an equal place, and that I have not seen yet. So at the moment, we do not have indigenous holiday, and I hope that, at the time when it was offered to us, I was only the Prince of Moruga. I didn't have a loud voice. I couldn't speak above our chief. I couldn't make a lot of decisions. I was limited. And I remember that day, and I said, no, we should have our holiday. And then, you know, they would ask, obviously, and what's your position? And then I just had to shut my mouth. But even then, I said that we should not just have a one-off, that we should have a full-on holiday annually, every year. And it doesn't have to be in October. Because, I mean, from last year, I want to speak on my topic now is the holiday for us, to bring recognition and to bring better identity to the Indigenous community, where we be able to identify ourselves, people of Indigenous descent, as well as people who are outside of that, would also be able to engage in indigenous activity. You know, when you look at celebrations like Diwali and even that time leading up to Diwali Nagar, which I've learned so much from during my ride across the country on the horse. And by the way, none of the horses died. Note to everyone. We could talk about that after. And during that time, I saw how the East Indian community celebrated their celebration. And I thought to myself, I said, this is something that we could learn from in the Indigenous world on ways that we can have our celebration, perhaps have something, a grand festival running for a few days as they have the Diwali Nagar, you know, and even with the African emancipation celebrations, when that's around, they have the whole savannah for themselves, the people of African descent or who celebrate African ancestry, and they have all these booths and display, and the government is involved in funding these events. These different communities come together and they plan and execute their events. And I thought to myself, an occasion of this sort would definitely be something that we, people like us who have Indigenous descent or Indigenous descended, that we too have something similar to bring recognition to Indigenous heritage, culture, craft, language, foods, medicine, and to also be of service to the country where the culture and arts are concerned, to also be to also use our Indigenous knowledge in, for example, agriculture, reforestation, agricultural techniques, for example, and I was just before speaking to you all, I'm doing a preparation of a proposal for an Indigenous park where a person could see how the Trinity form of planting is done. So the Trinity form of planting is basically another example of Indigenous agriculture where you plant, let's say, for example, corn, the peas, and the squash or the pumpkin in the same vicinity. So one plant adds nutrients or invites nutrients or protects the other, one to the other. And similar with some of the other provisions, it's planted similarly. And, stuff like that. And even our herbal remedies, I was just hearing one of our brothers sharing on his remedy for his back pains, and then we have all these other plants that we can use as poultice for pains, for alleviating pains and pain remedies, and, the others, things like, as we know in Trinidad, with the DTP, as the eye wash or the, stuff like the Nani Boa for your herbal baths, etc., and stuff like that. And so that's some of the, the projection that we hope to see here, as well as monumental establishment. I mean, we don't have churches, we don't have mosques, we don't have temples, because Indigenous culture, we don't have that in this part of the world. However, temples here existed with the Incan Empire, the Mexican, etc., and the others in Belize, etc., with the pyramids and so on. And even with palaces and pyramids having existed hundreds of years ago, and so were the chieftaincies having been set up with the different orders in the hierarchy, etc. I mean, it's difficult to replicate all of those things today, but the little that we're able to, bring into existence today, we are willing to share that with the country, to share it with the nation, and to share it with also the Caribbean island. So as Grand Chief, I also share with the other regions in the Caribbean and in Latin America, even with those back in the Amazon. And I'm not kidding you. So apart from Trinidad, or just Trinidad's Indigenous community, which is very small and minute in the world, not even a drop in the Indigenous world, they still look at us as a good example of what we have done in helping promote our indigenous culture. True, one of the things that we have done is some of the things that we have done. Well, you would have been aware of the ride across the country. We have basically erected 3 statues and monuments in different parts of Trinidad. One in Moruga, another in Shoguanas, another in the Couva vicinity of Whiteland. And we propose to erect some others in other spaces that were indigenously named, you know, as some of us would know already. I wouldn't go back into the name of the spaces, even into Port of Spain. And that too had received its own oppositions. And we ourselves, by the way, would be funding our monuments, sculpting our monuments, and erecting them on our own. So we wouldn't have that problem as had with the one that they recently did in San Fernando, you know? So today, what do we do here in Trinidad still? So we basically, in my becoming or as succession, while I succeeded the chieftaincy in becoming Grand Chief, I saw that some person said, oh, he crowned himself. No, it wasn't done that way. There's a council, there's a Grand Chief Council, which was the council for Paul Navarro, the Grand Chief Paul Navarro. And upon his passing, that council immediately takes over the next in line, right? So from the council, a new chief would be born, right? Yes, I was already set up to be as the Prince of Moruga, but we had tons of ceremonies, internal ceremonies to do for my becoming chief, and even just before the proclamation would have been read that I am going to be the new incoming chief, which was consulted with all the indigenous groups of Trinidad. Well, the recognized groups up till that time, I should say. And everyone agreed. And just at the 2 weeks before my coronation ceremony, there we had the rivals coming in. Now, those groups were also part of another council, a national council for the coronation. And some of them gave the date, others gave the symbols to be used, some of them gave advice, etc., on how it's to be rolled out and how it's to be done, where it should be done, etc. And then we had the disruption or interruption in the affairs of the coronation ceremony. Anyways, so the coronation event did happen on the in the year 2023 on the 9th of August, which we also celebrate as World Indigenous Day. And the function was well attended in Port of Spain, starting at the yard of the Immaculate Conception, the cathedral there, for the same reason of it being firstly an indigenous heritage space, an indigenous sacred space before it became a cathedral. And then the procession led up to Abercrombie Street to the cathedral, to the Red House, to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, where the coronation ceremony itself carried on. And that carried on there to show that, you know, in keeping with the ancestral presence that's there, that all of those things would work in tandem with this new incoming chief. And then there was a procession, a motorcade from Port of Spain to Moruga, where the enthronement ceremony took place in the Great Hall of Grand Chief Paul Navarro, to show that, you know, at that final moment that I would be, you know, his immediate successor and person to carry on this chieftaincy. So as Grand Chief today, what I have been doing, or I've been working with different communities in different parts of Trinidad, reinstalling indigenous leaders in different parts of the island. So far we have done, well, there's also a new chief in Moruga, Chief Jimmy Rivero, who was also one of the council members now would be elevated to higher members. So from the council members, we would choose chiefs, chieftesses, and, you know, raise everybody's profile and authority also, as would rise the Grand Chief. And so new council members would be accepted. And so the chieftaincy is expected to expand and to grow so that it is not solely dependent on one person calling the shots or running the show, as we say in Trinidad, and so that the heritage and culture of an indigenous population will continue for, as long as the council continues to do what it's supposed to do by lifting people up, by identifying people of indigenous descent, by having new registration, by carrying out the duties of chieftaincy. And so we have San Fernando, Princestown, Moruga, a chief for the area is San Fernando, so the Nabarima chief, which is Chief Michael Stephen Navarro, Jimmy Rivera, as I said, for Moruga, Chief Camila Sabala for the Shoguanese area, Chieftess Nicole Nicholas for the area of San Rafael de Arenales, all the way back to her chieftaincy would run into Arima and all the way back to Valencia. Then we have Risha Garcia for Sangre Grande. You know the history of Sangre Grande, right? Where Sangre Grande means big bloodshed. And she would go all the way back up to Toco. We have Agustin Chin for Port of Spain, which is the Ma Mucarapo. We have Joseph Codrington for Siparia and those environs all the way back to Icacos, Mondiablo, Pinal, all the way back boundary to Moruga. And then we have Oliver, Jason Oliver, our representative for Tobago, and Star Timothy for Aruca, Taka, Tunapuna, Tacarigua, into the San Jose de Oruna. So that's how our chieftaincy is set up, as well as we have sent out ambassadors representing us to Venezuela, Peru, Chile, America. We have representatives in America, Canada, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Santo Domingo, and one representative in Dominica as well. So that's our, some of the work that we have done so far, as well as we accept groups visiting, group and tours visiting to our great hall where we have our indigenous heritage on display, the artisanal stuff on display. Some days we also have heritage days. Sometimes of the day we have heritage days where we have to do the food preparation and the food and drink. There's also some of the beverages, which the old ancient beverages, which we still do. And the groups also get to participate in, eat some of the food that's prepared by our indigenous community, see the weaving of the basket or participate in that, or the plaiting of the palms, etc. As well as when invited, we attend different functions at schools, sharing our indigenous knowledge history and taking some of the artifacts and artisanals with us also, and attending conferences, religious ceremonies and functions, as well as state ceremonies and functions to ensure that our presence is felt and that it's there. Now that's the next thing by itself. And also in state, in the state, we are recognized by the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. There has also been a parliamentary commission and committee to deal with our affairs, however, not to intervene in our affairs. So I also saw that there was a statement that only a particular group of indigenous people are recognized by Parliament. That is not so. Even during my service as Prince of Moruga and in the time of Chief Paul Navarro, the Ministry of Community Development, Culture and the Arts paid particular attention to our affairs and our operations. The Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago also did the same, and the Parliamentary Committee also recognized us, our autonomy as well. And interestingly, we made contact with the Kingdom of Spain for the purpose of getting our archival records directly from them, which we have accomplished, and which we have gotten some maps as well as books, which is the same book that I shared with you. So a set of books were gifted to us from the Kingdom of Spain directly. We are also recognized by the Vatican, and also Pope Francis also sent a letter of shared apostolic blessing on the coronation ceremony, etc., as well as they also recognize the title of Grand Chief and the other titles that goes with it back in Spain. So also does the other indigenous of New Zealand, one of the indigenous, the New Zealand King, King George. He also wrote on that. Some of the sisters from India and Indonesia. Also, we recently made contact with them. And well, as I said, those back in the South America here and also Central America and some of those in Canada and America, which is, normal. So today we continue to meet groups and schools visit us ever so often. And this is how we keep our heritage, our identity, present and relatable in today's society, where persons could, probably go check their ancestry or speak with their grandparents or family, and come up with, hey, I have indigenous ancestry. This might be something that I should look into. It's not about, just the fanfare and this function and that function, but also to help build inculcate a sense of pride in heritage and culture and identity, so that person can also help, chart their course and see what they can learn from their ancestors' path that they can apply in their own life in living in today's world. Jakira, thank you all for listening, and thank you for giving me that time to explain.
Thank you so much for sharing. I was taking notes as you were chatting, and I believe you're such a wealth of information. I know we're gonna open for questions. I'll let Cynthia go because I saw that she puts up a hand, and I'm sure there are other questions from the group as well. Cynthia?
Sure.
Thank you very much. I am absolutely amazed. As Gersha said, I was also making notes. It is amazing the amount of work that you've been doing, and congratulations. My question
Thank
is
you.
about the museum. Am I correct in thinking that some years ago you gave a talk about your work at the museum at SAPA in San Fernando?
Okay.
Is the museum still in existence and being looked after?
Well, since that time, we have two museums now. So we have the Moruga Museum, we have the National Cocoa and Chocolate Museum, and the Great Hall also functions somewhat like a museum as well. So currently, we are doing renovative work and expansion work at the Moruga Museum. So right now, the Moruga Museum is under that renovation and reconstruction, and the artifacts are now currently housed and storage. Some of them are in storage. And when it's time for an indigenous display, some of the artifacts are put on display at the Great Hall here in Moruga, in the vicinity of the Cocoa Museum.
Wonderful. Heartiest congratulations again.
Thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia. I have a question. You mentioned different groups. How many groups do we have in Trinidad exactly?
So we have our own groups, which I mentioned earlier on. And even for us, we should have like about 10 groups that's under our chieftaincy.
Mhm.
Outside of that, some of them, the one group that I could recognize would be the Santa Rosa First People, because they have the number, they have the autonomy,
Okay.
right? And then Santa Rosa now also is now conglomerated. To my knowledge, I'm of the assumption that they are now linked with the one of these San Fernando groups and the Superior in one. Now, the Superior group, it's like 3 persons.
Okay.
The San Fernando group has 2 persons,
Okay.
right? And this is not from our chieftaincy. For us, each group autonomy should be somewhat set up executively with its own council and its own external members who are not numbered in your group. Not numbered amongst your council. So you should have about 50 persons in each group.
Okay. And if
So-
like as a write-if, Mhm.
So for some of them, we would not recognize them as a group because they don't have the autonomy. They are not, they're not. There should be more than 5 at least in your autonomy to my thing, and then you have the other things that you should have. For example, if I'm going to a function as chief, my retinue or entourage just to take care of me, it's 12 persons or 15 persons. Right? That's if I'm attending a function in official capacity as Grand Chief, I'm going to do ceremonial stuff. So if you don't have that as a leader, this is not my council is separate from them, then I can't recognize that as a group, because a group should be in an indigenous thing. And then if you claim the word of a nation means that you should be more than 300 persons. So, I saw one group using the word Warao Nation. I would not recognize it as a Warao Nation, because a Warao Nation would be built up of several tribes, right? Communities, and this is the dictionary meaning, and this is also the indigenous meaning, and several communities spread throughout the land where you have different leaders apart from you alone being a leader, yeah? And so I would not recognize that as a nation, and I would not recognize those 2 others for Superior and San Fernando, right? So I would give recognition to the one in Arima. They have the autonomy, they have had the autonomy for many years, and so we recognize them. But the others are, they need to work on building their community, they need to work on their capacity and also their autonomy, which they haven't done yet.
Okay, and when you talk about, I know like in the US with their Native American tribes, they have actual records of who is Native American and what percentage of Native American they have within them. Do we have something similar in Trinidad?
We are presently building that. So we also have our online registration on our website where people could start the registration process with us. Then we advise them on how to proceed. We form them, we add them to a particular group depending on where they're from. So because we have strategic setup throughout the island, we can say, okay, since you're from San Fernando, you're gonna join with the San Fernando Chieftaincy under the Chief Camila Sabala. Or if you're from San Fernando, we're gonna have you in the San Fernando community. You could serve in that community, etc. You can make your, whatever contributions of ideas, of thoughts to that community and work in your community. So stuff like that. As per the percentage, once you get the family name, we could also do the genealogy in most cases of your family's ancestry, as well as, there's also now the DNA ancestry, which you could use to see your percentage and which part or what type of indigenous group or indigenous grouping that your ancestors would have come from. So I believe we are the only group on the island that's at that level right now.
Okay.
I don't think none of the other groups have any form of registration like that, whether online or in any form. And many of them are skeptical of welcoming anybody to join in their group or their following, and worse yet, to even enter their council.
Okay. Well, it sounds very organized. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand, or just
I just wanted to make a comment.
Sure, Frank.
First of all, thanks for such an exhaustive report. I enjoyed listening to it. And it seems that I'm calling from Canada, and it seems that there's a common denominator in the way in which the Europeans first treated all the indigenous groups from Canada all the way down to Argentina. And that is, they had the idea that anybody who is different than a European had to be labeled a savage. But yes, when thinking about the word savage, the Europeans committed genocide, murder, removal of children, particularly in Canada and the United States, from the parents to so-called civilize them, physical and sexual abuse, slavery. To me, that is more savage than a definition of the word savage than anything else. And when the Europeans first came to North America, particularly in the US, there's a book written by somebody called Astra Taylor. And the name of the book is democracy may not exist, but we'll miss it when it's gone. But in it, she was mentioning when the Europeans first came, they sent back reports to Europe about these barbarians. But other people among those explorers, like explorers, missionaries, soldiers, colonists, they reported back to Europe that the indigenous people had something unique that the Europeans didn't have, and that was freedom, the concept of freedom, and the concept of equality and masterlessness, meaning they didn't have like a king or queen ruling everybody. So that type of attitude where these people had to be subdued and even gotten rid of by genocide seems to be a common denominator in all over the Americas. And one example is a revered first Prime Minister of Canada. His name is Sir John A. Macdonald, back in the 1800s. He was quite supportive of getting rid of the indigenous peoples through genocide methods. And in fact, because they were, they didn't have the antibodies for diseases like viruses like chickenpox and smallpox and so on, he actually deliberately had blankets impregnated with smallpox and given for free to the native Indians simply to get rid of them. That's known in history here, but he's revered as a hero in Canada, the same way I guess Churchill is a hero in England, but did quite a few atrocious decisions for India as well. So my point is that I can see what you're saying about how the indigenous peoples were treated by the Spanish initially. That's just a statement I wanted to make. But there's a question I have. In the beginning, you mentioned rescuing a whale. For you alone to get a whale out in the water, what kind of whale would it have been? Like a pilot whale, maybe a small whale or so?
It was it wasn't a fully grown one. I forgot to explain that because I just wanted to stick with the time too. It was a false killer whale. It's called a false killer whale, and those are toothed whales, and they can exist in warm tropical waters.
Okay.
And they usually travel in groups. And what happened? The whale may have lost its direction due to the murkiness of the water in Moruga at that particular time of year, and so that would have caused its beaching. Because once the water, what's said is that when they have to send out the echolocation would help the whale decide where land is and where water is and which direction to go. Once it gets into the murky water, when it sends out the echolocation, assumingly that it would have sent out the echolocation and then get land all around, because it's like thick murky water with all this sediment, etc. And possibly that would have been the reason for its beaching. And then on its return, out at sea into the clean waters would be where it would get the thing. But the whale was just about 8 feet long, 8 to 9. Yeah, 9 feet in total. Yeah, based on the records.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Frank. Arlene, you have a question. So I'm calling on Arlene next.
Sort of like a comment and a question too. It's really nice meeting you, Eric. When one think of the Amerindian community, particularly, I never thought of the Amerindian community when I lived in Trinidad. I live in the United States, and I left Trinidad when I was 14. But my family background is very much rooted in that community, coming from my great-grandmother, who happens to be a Marchand. Her last name was Marchand. And my great-grandfather, whose name was Macano, and his mother came from Bolivia. But besides that, that's just, and I am going through my process of tracking where they, where they came from and what that meant for my family. But when one think of the Amerindian community, particularly growing up in Trinidad, where the movie was like, I mean, that's what you went to see in the movies, and you saw what that was about. So people laugh when I say that when I came to America and I heard and actually studied a little bit of the Native American community here, that you thought that, I said, what? I mean, they laugh when I say, well, I thought John Wayne killed them all of the Indians. But the reality of it is that they are very well and strong and living. And I'm so happy to see that you are there and that work is being done. When I was there a couple of years ago, I visited the Santa Rosa community. So my question is, in Moruga, because in Santa Rosa, my understanding is it's the Carib Indians, is that tribe there. So in in Moruga, what is the tribes that make up your community? I mean, if that makes any sense.
The same tribe that runs in your bloodline, because my mother is Machan and Macano also.
Oh my God!
Hello, family.
Hello, family! Oh my God!
I'm listening to you talk, and everything that you said, that the family coming from Bolivia and Peru, etc., and then from Venezuela to Trinidad, it's a mix of tribes. So we have moved away from just singling out the tribe thing now, and all of these things are currently being debated by indigenous groups around the world, and I do attend these functions. As I said earlier, I'm linked with the others. So we are, so I would be considered Kalinago, according to some of my other indigenous friends in Puerto Rico, and from Ubague, which is Cuba, and Santo Domingo. At the same time, for the Warao people, they also consider us having Warao descent, which we do. So they consider me Warao also. And then there are those here in Trinidad, there are the others from Dominica, they consider me Kalinago, because again, of our ancestry.
Yeah, wow.
And it's all of that comprise us. So we just use the term First Peoples, Indigenous, and many parts of the world, they're agreeing to that now. So that's why, like, even in America right now, they've gone back to the indigenous people or the natives of the land, or the first natives. Same they are doing. Well, in the case of New Zealand, New Zealand was conquered by their indigenous community about 300 years before the arrival of the Europeans. So then they started having a problem with that with the Maori people. So based on the international, based on international context of things, and especially for us Caribbean people of this indigenous descent, it's difficult for us to single-handedly choose one of the tribes based on just because of where we are from. If you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand. Wow. Okay.
So the Macano and the Machans are my family. That's my mom's side, and that's the side that I have. We inherit our chieftaincy from, as well as they are linked to the Trea and the Navarro. And it's really, really, really interesting. So the great-grandfather was Pedro, I think met Pedro Torres or something like that. The next great-grandmother was Utakia Machan. I can share a photo of her if you like. I have her picture, and she was born like in 1800. She was in the 1850s, 1840s, thereabout, 1840s to 1850s. And she came across to Trinidad well, the family went back to Venezuela, came back to Trinidad. You know, that whole thing of them coming down from Peru, etc., just as Peru and Bolivia, as you said. And long story short, ending up over here.
Wow.
And yeah, so I could share that with you, and you all are free to, you could feel free to have my number, and you can WhatsApp me afterwards, because just yesterday I was sharing the great grandmother's picture.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Oh.
You put it in the chat, or I can look at it. Yeah.
We're recording the chat, so I can give it to you after, Arlene. I'll email it to you.
Give it to you privately. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you. Thanks.
So imagine we get to meet up without using ancestry.com.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Definitely.
That is amazing. I'm in awe.
It's absolutely amazing. And I'm listening to her. And my mom, Marchan and Markan. I'm like, okay.
Wow. If anyone else has a question, Heather?
Yes, I just have a question. Actually, Eric, I must say your report was riveting. Like Arlene, you know, we were not brought up in. I'm from Trinidad. I'm in Canada at the moment. And I've been here for almost 50 years. But growing up in Trinidad, we were so totally unaware of the first peoples of the island, you know, and yet that history is so compelling. I was also making notes, but could you spell for me that chief Bacamare? How do you spell that?
I would like, one of my plans is to have a statue built in his honor and possibly placed in Port of Spain. And amongst the others, and all the others also, all of those others, the names that I have called out, I would also like to have, of the 3 statues that we have erected so far, one of them going to carry the names of the others, but Bukamari is the most important one, and I'm happy that you all are paying interest in him.
Could you spell that for me?
Yeah, Baucumar.
Cumar. Okay, and was the chief, was Castian a chief as well?
Whom?
I think you mentioned
Castellano,
the name.
no, Castillo he was one of the Spanish writers.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm very interested
C-A-S-T-E.
in that chief that you mentioned. So any other information I could get on him would be very good for me. I do a series of writings and stories, and I'm interested in that character.
Sure. You can write me after, you can send me some WhatsApp and so on. And well, my number would be shared with your person privately afterwards, so we can, you know, follow up.
Well, thank you very much for this. Thank you.
Where would we get information as a writer if you want to research the indigenous groups, or you want to get information, say, you know, the National Archives or something? Where would we go to get that information other than?
The National Archive has a lot of information in the indigenous community. Okay. The problem with that is that no one is going there to pick up that book to study it for free, as I am doing it right now in Trinidad. So I spend the time, you know, going to the archive. I haven't done so in a while, but I also own my own archives here in Moruga. I forgot to say that. I also have the archives of Moruga, which also have some of the, you know, plantation records, which is like a few hundred books and ledgers and maps. And I have all the map plans for Trinidad, by the way, from 1930s, the 1930s, when the country would have been its surveyed plans. As well, I have some of the Spanish maps from the 1500s.
Yes, you mentioned getting something from the documents and stuff from the Spanish government, but in Moruga, is there an access or a library if a writer were to come that they would have access to do research?
Sure. And sometimes I loan some of these, I loan some of the materials, like the books, some of the books. Well, one of the particular books would be the Trinidad Espanol as well, too, with the hope of getting it back.
Oh, yes, let's hope.
And some of my history would also be rooted in some of the Caribbean archaeology texts, right?
Mhm.
And also shared information amongst us in the indigenous, how to put it, like other indigenous groups, etc. We would have like really good conversations. We also have an indigenous lawyer who is based in Florida, but Spanish speaking. So I think one of my advantage has been the fact that I have a bit of Spanish fluency and that I also speak some of the indigenous language. So I get to communicate with everyone in their different language and they communicate with me. And I think that was one of the problems with Trinidad, that our other indigenous leaders, they don't speak Spanish, they don't speak any of the other indigenous languages. They basically remain just like with Suriname and some, not even parts of Venezuela, just like Suriname and some of them to Guyana, and that's it. But I have opened up myself and offered myself to collaboration with indigenous groups from around the world, because I believe that I can learn from Canada, I can learn from America, the American natives, that is of the Canadian natives, I can learn from New Zealand, I can learn from those indigenous in Venezuela, and all the way back up to Peru and Bolivia, etc. And and in the Caribbean. So with that, I think that's one of the advantages that I have in opening up myself to discussion and discourse and planning and so on. And sometimes we have our discussion online on TikTok and so on. I mean, I'm on TikTok too sometimes. I can't do these posts every single day, but I do. And that also helps with communication and contact with the other groups. And then afterwards, we would use like emails and so on.
Okay. If there are no other questions from anyone else, I have another question. But I'm just looking. So if anyone has a question, you can certainly jump in.
Yeah,
Heather, if you have
that's a
another question.
Yeah,
Hi, Krishna.
right.
Hi,
I
Krishna.
just want to get back. I just want to get back to that question about the holiday, Chief Lewis. That holiday you mentioned, October. I'm just curious. So they had suggested a holiday, but for a certain year only.
The Prime Minister then,
yes.
Keith
Could
Rowley,
you talk about that a little?
offered us a holiday, right? And this was amongst the main groups at the time. Now the other group, the group of San Fernando, the group there in San Fernando, that group died, like many of the persons died and are infirmed. The problem with some of the groups, they were not properly structured, so they didn't command the attention of the government properly. And the majority say went on Santa Rosa community. So Santa Rosa community had a louder voice at the time when Keith Rowley asked us if we want a permanent holiday. Mm-hmm. And your goodly chief, Ricardo Barrett, which is on the media, and you could see it on the television, you can go look it up, I guess it's still there, said, no, this country already has too much holidays. And if people see us parading the streets in our indigenous costumes, I'm quoting, they will think that we are having a carnival celebration, and it will only add to the bacchanal mentality and the lazy attitude of our Trinidad society, because people just want our holiday and not to go to work. I quote Ricardo Barrett, Chief President of the Central.
Faint memory of reading that somewhere. So this Ricardo Barrett is Santa Rosa base.
He's Santa Rosa base, and he's for the Santa Rosa Carib community only.
Okay, right. Because when you mentioned Paul Navarro and how you succeeded him, I said, but wait now. Paul Navarro died. I can't remember that. But what happened is in my head, I was mixing him up with Ricardo Barrett now, right?
Yeah, Paul Navarro died at 109 months. I mean, 103 years and 9 months old.
I see you have the 9th of August 2023 was when you were coronated. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Right. So I say probably that was the time Paul Navarro died.
He died a year before that, so we have a whole year
Right.
of
Okay.
mourning and preparation and
Yeah.
all of this sort of stuff, and it gave the council good time to do everything they had to do. So
All right. Yeah.
it's not supposed to, it was not supposed to have any objection of who was supposed to succeed him after an entire year of
Okay.
the chieftaincy being vacant. And just coming in 2 weeks before my inauguration was when the Game of Thrones fight started off, you know,
Yes.
and it was literally a fight for what I guess power and the fear that I would dissolve some of the groups, or I don't know, as we see in Trinidad, mash them up. But that's not me. That's not me. I believe every person, whether wherever they are or whatever they have to do, that each person have their duty, their purpose, and their mission, that they have to, sustain that, and that they have their work to do. So, I don't give attention to, I have gone through a lot of negativities myself.
Well, that's what I heard you say. I heard you say that Paul Navarro was not a popular one.
Because for me, this is part of the purpose of my existence. And if I am not to do that, which was said to me by the old chief, Paul Navarro, he said, listen, he said, I don't want you to ever think about abdicating or not continuing the mission set before you. He said this to me before he died, and I did say to him that I'm good, I could resign now as Prince. He said, no. He said, continue to do what you have to do. And said, and if you live the purpose that you are made to do in this life, you would die in peace and satisfy all of what you are placed here to do, meaning the ancestors and etc., etc. And then after that, he said, let's take a drink for that. So I continue literally daily in my life. By the way, we also have a physical indigenous community here in Moruga, where we have our setup, where we have our communal space as well, where some of the indigenous people live here on the compound. We live in different houses, but together most of the times. And that is something that I wanted to share with you, as well as we also service the needs of the indigenous people from Venezuela who are in Trinidad. So the Warao people, we also work with them, with the United Nations, with International Organization for Migrants, with Living Waters, in helping supply their basic needs, or whether it's food, shelter, accommodation, as well as with immigration whenever they need to get registered, or with the medical community, which is Red Cross, etc., to supply that. So that's some of the work that I do, like the real, hands-on stuff.
All right, and one more question before I give Gusha the chance. Spaces, you mentioned that some of these spaces were named after the chiefs. You talk about like Mukarapo. You said Ma Mukarapo?
Yeah.
Is it Ma Mukarapo? Oh.
Let me I have some of the names.
Yeah,
If you don't have any interest in getting the names and their spellings, send it to the coordinator and I can get them back to you and send it in text so we can have the correct spelling.
Yeah, I think I hear you say Ma Mukarapo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so in the light of that, I didn't hear anything on Cleaver Woods. To me, I associate these are some places I associate with I notice also you don't want to use, you're reserved about the term Amerindian. That's correct, right? I agree with that. So Cleaver Woods, Naparima Hill, and La Divina Pastora de Siparia Church there.
Right. So I would use the
Is there any links?
Navarina, because
are there any links?
Navarina was the name of all of San Fernando, not just the hill, right? So I'm making the correction to that. La Divina Pastora was the divine shepherdess, and she basically was introduced to the indigenous community in the 1700s for the conversion of the indigenous people, the Amerindians.
Correct.
In 1697, she would have been introduced there under the Spanish Franciscan friars.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, it is said that it was brought over from Venezuela
The
to Trinidad.
Capuchin.
Now,
The
true,
Capuchin,
but
I
it's a
think it's the
wooden
Capuchin
statue, and she,
priest. I think it was the Capuchin priest, the Capuchin
the
order.
Franciscan
Yeah,
Capuchin.
all right.
That's what they call. That's the
Okay, good,
Franciscan Capuchin
right,
friars,
good.
which also includes priests, but are not limited to priests only, because some of them are brothers.
And Cleaver Woods,
And
where they
Cleaver
have,
was one of the areas set up for
churches.
the indigenous community of that side in Arima there, where they would have been assigned that little area to have displays and etc. But that today is just trees now. It's literally woods.
Yeah, I noticed that they didn't upkeep it.
So that community again is, dissolved or gone, however. But you see, things like this happens when I would use the term power in for lack of a better word, when power is not passed on, when community is not properly built, and when people hold positions to themselves, And I don't believe in that. I believe if you are elevated, you should raise up those around you, empower them, motivate them, help them to lead, that they will help you lead, that you would lead together, that you would guide and stay together. So this is my personal philosophy. And it's one way that I hope that when I say the chieftaincy, I don't refer to myself. I mean everything that's in line with indigenous heritage and culture for all of us, not just in Trinidad and Tobago, for all of us, that the remnants of that heritage and culture that we have, that it can continue to the next generation, that the stories could be written, not just written in books only, but made, some little videos out of it, some little TikToks out of it, some little Instagram reels on it, which is what I do sometimes myself. And depending on my social media manager, they would also do that with us also. And so some of the other groups, I share information with those on the other islands and the other countries who make the reels and the videos. So, if we work together in using our different gifts, you're going to see change. You're going to see dissemination of information, and that would also help the posterity and the preservation, in the sense of the preservation and the heritage of our culture into the 20 whatever century long from now.
And linked with that same idea about space, you mentioned the statues and monuments were erected in Moruga, Chaguanas, Cuba, Whiteland. Just out of my interest, Whiteland. Where in Whiteland? You mentioned
Whiteland is.
Whiteland.
Let me give you
No, what statue? What monument?
It's Whiteland is west of the Paria, and it's Paria, and it's the western side of Gasparilla, in that direction.
I know Whiteland.
Yes, in the eastern side, sorry. It's on the eastern side of Gasparilla and the eastern side of Paria. So that area, some years ago, we basically validated some Amerindian artifacts in that same area, as well as we have a community there in Whiteland, that Whiteland community, so when we say Whiteland community, for us it means like Brasso Seco, Talparo, Tabaquit, and Mamaral,
it's a broad area
where many of our relatives are from also. The Marchans and the Macanos are also from that area as well, if Miss Marchand is still on the line.
And Chaguanas.
Chaguanas was erected at State Park along Ramsaran Street at State Park. And that Chaguana statue represents the Chaguanese people. However, the statue is named after one of those great warriors from the 1520s, 1530s here.
Okay. All right, thanks. Gush, all yours.
Hi, okay. If there are no other questions, I have two things. I do still have one other question. We have our topic of discussion, which would be, how do we represent the indigenous people, the first people, into our writing? My question to you were, if you were to build a character representing that were to represent the First Peoples, and set them in today's world of 2025, what characteristics would you include? You know, how do we go about writing where it's not a trope or it's not based in soul stereotypes?
Well, I think one of the ways could be by incorporating these stories and these history into little books where it could be used for children, adults, and, you know, even for pleasurable leisure reading in those regards, because not everyone's going to sit and read a text and all these sort of texts that I read. It could be quite cumbersome on your brain sometimes, you know, because when I'm reading these books, like, it's written in such a way sometimes that it's a difficult read to even get the date of when something happened. So then you have to be back and forth, chapter to chapter, like going backward. Yeah, and it's like, you know, and it's even how they wrote it with the, like, it was directly translated from Spanish with very little, you know, consciousness of how English speakers speak or write in some instance, as you heard in the poem. You know, it's not, some things like that are not reader friendly, I would say, for leisure reading. And perhaps authors and writers like yourselves can, for example, like the story with the whale. That's a beautiful story. You know, stories like, you know, some of the indigenous things, some of the indigenous stories as well. You know, like when you have the, in the Hindu community, they have all these beautiful stories and then they reenact it when it's time for the celebration you have just before Diwali. What's it called again?
Ramlila.
Ramlila, correct.
Yes.
And they dramatize all of this Ramlila thing where the two nations meet, etc., and the horseman rides in the first night of the Ramlila and all of that. You know, and I looked at that, and that too, when I sat there, by the way, I rode across the country on a horse to promote peace, unity, and to show equality amongst religious denominations, etc., while doing different ceremonies along the way from Muruga to Port of Spain over a period of 10 days. And I would ride 2 to 3 hours or 4 hours maximum per day on the horse and then rest in those particular areas that were indigenous spaces, like, you know, as you mentioned, Saparia, and, you know, I did visit the Saparia, La Vida Pastora, and did a ceremony there, and then went on to San Fernando, did a ceremony there, continuing to the Nabarima, etc., etc. Long story short. And I saw how the Ramlila is celebrated, and I'm thinking, for example, in indigenous community in Trinidad, well, not the full community, but according to these history books that I read, one chief son wanted to marry another chief's daughter. And then the chief said to him, listen, you can have my daughter when these two mountains here separate. He said, the moment the mountains separate, my daughter shall be yours. So, all right, the next chief, he went back, he did his ceremony. Apparently, he went up on the mountain top. And guess what? The mountain did separate in truth. That's one of those hills in the northern range of Trinidad, the one that it has a double peak, and one of the peaks to the western side, like it literally dropped. And then he went back and said, well, you know, the mountain has separated and it has parted. Can I now have your daughter's hand in marriage? You know, and so the two tribes had to come together and celebrate and marry. You know, so stories like that, if these stories are now, you know, rewritten and represented now, which would represent us, and represented in the sense I'm seeing it exactly like that, to show some of the, you know, the mythological stuff, or even the story of the Pitch Lake, where it is said that the entire village, the long story short again, where the entire village was absorbed by they were cursed because they were killing too many of the hummingbirds. And the god was angry with them and swallowed up the entire village, which is within the Pitch Lake. But as we know, the Pitch Lake is a soft thing. And however, and in addition to that, archaeologists also, well, not really archaeologists, but during the excavation there, they also found the Amerindian remains amongst the pitch that they had at the Pitch Lake, and they sent it abroad. It had it authenticated and sent back to Trinidad, and it's now at the National Museum in Port of Spain, National Museum and Art Gallery in Port of Spain. You know, so stories like those would be ideal to write over, you know, like, you know, and become our, well, they are our stories, except our stories are not known as people know the Jesus and Mary jump on a donkey, ride into Egypt after Pharaoh want to kill him, or the three wise men follow us story, you know. And even with the Ram Leela stories or you know, several of the other stories from the Bhagavad Gita or stories from the, what do you call this thing? The Quran, you know, or even the writings of coniferous. So, you know, so that's something that we need to promote in all of the indigenous world of the Americas. And I believe in writers like yourselves are the ones with the power in the pen. Well, now it might be on the screen and the typing of the letters through the computer, are the ones with that power to bring our narrative to the next century, you know?
Certainly. Does anyone else have any questions? Thank you so much for your answer. Arlene? Arlene, kindly unmute. Hold on, 1 second.
Come
Arlene,
out,
you're still
we
muted.
can have a session without you saying something.
Well, I know I have to say this because I want to apologize to Chief Lewis for calling him Eric at the very beginning. I should have been much more formal in greeting, in addressing him. Having said that, so I apologize. Having said that, in terms of, you said you have in Moruga, you have a compound. So is it like self-supportive, or I mean, you know, or do you also get funds from the Trinidad government?
Right, so that's a good question. And we don't get, I have not written for funds from the government. We have not received any subventions since our existence, and that is even since the time of Paul Navarro, the Chief Paul Navarro. And because it was he initially did not want to have us under anyone, you know. So to say that we were even funded by the government, we have not been and we will not. However, my coronation ceremony was government funded, right? Because when he passed, the ministry had the list. They wanted to know what's going to happen with the succession, what's going to happen with the Moruga indigenous community. Are we going to continue? And they also understood that that even at my time, even at his passing, that our indigenous community was already prepped to be a national community and not just a Moruga indigenous community. And the reason why we already prepped for being a national community because our council was a national council with persons from different parts of the island and different family members in different parts of the island, etc. Currently, we are still not receiving any subvention. As I said, we did not write for it. However, we are more so at the moment self-funded. The council, our council funds everything. Thus far, we look good. We look like one of the richest indigenous groups in the Caribbean and possibly in the Americas. I'm not kidding, because of how many things that we have done. I don't mean North America, like in this part of South America and the Caribbean, because you know the North American ones and the Canadian ones are very well. They receive a lot of funding from the government, etc. But for the Caribbean and Latin America, we look well. We look good. And this is based on what they said to me, not me saying this to myself or saying this to our community, but they say that we have a very good outlook for the work that we have been doing and the work that we have done. And that even includes us not even having received government funding or subventions for operations.
So you also have like, I mean, say funding, I mean, like if people want to donate to the community and those sorts of things, do you have that sort of stuff in place that can happen?
Yeah, we have a bank account under the name of the one of our organizations that, you know, well, people usually ask for it and then they never donate anything. But anyway, but we do have that existing because for the purpose of the organization, well, for organizational purpose, it exists under one of our charity groups, So that goes, the money will go to that and then come back to the community or be disbursed to the community.
Okay, once you share the picture, I believe it's a picture of your grandmother, you can share that with me as well. I can do an email and send it out to the group.
Right.
But I'll
Gersh,
only send it to my relatives.
Oh, you mean the picture of your grandmother?
Yeah,
Great.
my great grandmother,
Oh,
that is.
great,
your
great
great-grandmother. Okay, no problem. But
And
then
mine-
send me at least the donation information so I can include that when I send that information out.
Sure, sure.
Thank you.
You're
All
welcome.
right.
Okay, and Caroline has a question. I do want to pause for 2 seconds. We're at 3:05 and we have 2 members that brought in things to read. I don't know if anyone else brought anything to read. So I just want to do a quick group conscience if they still want to do an open mic. Mutilal, what say ye? You're muted, Muti.
Okay, I see that we passed 3 o'clock, I don't know if you still want me to read.
If you want to read, I don't mind holding on once the group says yes. So are you yes or no on the open mic?
I'm okay with it,
Okay,
Gershia.
thank you. Cynthia, yes or no on the open mic?
I'm okay with it. Thanks.
Okay, lovely. Krishna, yes or no on the open mic?
I have no problem.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. And we will continue with Krishna then. His wife, Caroline, has a question.
No. She said she forget it.
No? We have the time. It's okay. If she still wants to ask.
Go ahead, Moti.
Okay.
Okay,
right. Well, thank you so much. If anyone else has any questions for Chief Eric Lewis. Alrighty. If you have any further questions, I'm only so far sharing his information with Heather, Arlene. Anyone else would like the information shared with you, just let me know, okay?
You can also share the email and the direct contact. That's fine.
Okay.
You know, and I use this. Actually, this number is actually a public number that I'm using, by the way.
Okay. So I'll
Well,
go
one
ahead.
of the public numbers, because it's the same number for the museum and all the other things in Maruga, etc. I have my private number also, but this is the one
Okay.
that I share.
All
for
right,
everything.
lovely. So I can go ahead and share your direct email and contact with the group. And we have Cynthia with one more question.
No,
And I
this
believe
thing,
this may be our last question before we go into the open mic.
just to
Cynthia?
say thanks very much again. And yes, I would like to have the information too, or to look up or, well, possibly donate when I get rich.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
lovely.
Sorry, I'm not hearing her.
She said she would love to have the information as well, to look up your more information and to donate to your group
Oh,
I donate when I
thank you.
get rich.
once she gets rich.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia. And with that, we will go right into our open mic. And there's only 2 persons. We'll start with Mutilal and then we have Heather.
So could I make my exit now?
Yes, you certainly can. We know we've
So-
taken up a lot of your time. You promised
No,
us
that's
2
cool.
hours,
It's
and
okay.
I thank you so much.
I really appreciated the time allotted to me, and I believe interview like this is necessary, even on a national level here in Trinidad or so on. And I'm happy for this time that we spent together. And what should I say? Jakera Dihana Nabakanai, which means I leave you all with all goodness, all peace, and I hope that everything will be well in you and your family, and in your homes and in your spaces. Jakera.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor speaking to you.
Yes. And definitely has been an honor me with all of you all today. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Okay. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Mutilal, you have the floor.
Well, I hope that after all this serious discussions, that I could lighten up the lighten up the program a bit. Okay, this one is called, just a minute, please. Huh? Okay. Yes, as I was saying that after all this serious discussion, I hope I could lighten up the atmosphere a bit. This is called a carrot tale. And I wrote this after I had a discussion with folklorist Al Ramsawak. In history classes during school days at primary and secondary school, I was taught that the indigenous people of the Caribbean were the Caribs and the Arawaks. Tales were told about the warlike nature of the Caribs and the gentle Arawaks. Later on in my studies, I learned that the correct names were Kalinagos and Tanos. In Trinidad, we still call them Caribs, and many of their descendants live in Arima and surrounding areas up to this time. They have their own queen and king and chief and preserve the Carib way of life and their various rituals. No, I don't mean waging war on their neighbors and being cannibals, as we were led to believe in those early history lessons, but sharing their heritage and preserving the customs of an earlier time while living in harmony and contributing to the development of Trinidad and Tobago. There are many suggestions as to how the Caribs came to live in the Caribbean islands. It seemed to most historians that prehistoric man from Asia were the ancestors of the Amerindians of the New World. They concluded that during the Fourth Ice Age, prehistoric man from Asia, while hunting the giant mammoths, had crossed the frozen Bering Straits and consequently entered into the continent of America. These Amerindians continued the migration southward into Mexico through the Isthmus of Panama and finally into South America. From South America, the descendants form new tribes that spreads northwards into the Caribbean. One of these tribes were the Caribs who came to Trinidad. The Carib people were medium in height and lean. They had long, straight, black hair that was worn loose. Their brown skin was always painted with a vegetable dye called ruku. They had flattened foreheads that was considered beautiful. The Carib people were usually naked except for a loincloth that was worn around their middle. The men were clean shaven since beards were considered a deformity and they were plucked out. They wore bracelets and necklaces made of amber shell, agouti teeth, seeds, and corals. The men sometimes wore necklaces of the enemy's teeth. Their ears and lips were bored with smooth fish bones and ornaments were placed in them. The Caribs wore small idols around their necks called maboyas. The Caribs' main god was the maboya. They felt that the maboya controlled everything. Each person had his or her own maboya to ward off all evil. The women and the men had different roles in the society. Men were supposed to be warriors, priests, leaders, builders of houses and boats, craftsmen and hunters. The women were supposed to do the domestic chores, bringing up the children, collecting firewood, bartering produce, weaving, hammock making, and cultivating the land. But even then, there was a woman who dared to be different, as you will hear in this story, as was told to me by folklorist Al Ramsawak a few years ago. Once there were little to reap in the fields, and the animals in the forest were scarce, as if they had gone into hiding. One day, a man told his wife that she was going to look for work in another village. Newly married, she wanted to go with him, but he explained that it was not possible because there were only men on the work site. She begged him, and yielding to her wishes, he agreed. He insisted, however, that she dress as a man to hide her identity. So she cut her hair, covered her breasts with many hog-tooth chains and cotton wrap, and wore a strip of bark from her waist down to prevent her nakedness from being seen. She went to work with all the other men. One evening, when the work was done, they all went to the river to bathe. She did not know what to do, as they all bathed without clothes, and she was afraid of being found out. So she and her husband waited until the others had their bath and then went home. This went on for quite a while until the others wondered why the newcomers would not go in the water with them, but waited till they had finished bathing. Two men decided to watch them and found out that there was a woman among them. When they saw the woman, they wanted her for themselves. They decided to kill the husband and take her. However, when they held the man, they noticed a necklace around his neck with a pendant on which was carved a maboya, one of the Carib gods, and which was supposed to protect the wearer. They became frightened, and instead of killing him, tied him up in a canoe and let it drift down the river into the sea, where he would drown or die of starvation or exposure or eaten by sharks. There were maboyas of the sea as well as of the forest. These maboyas were assisted by lesser gods called spirits. The sea cast the canoe back to shore, while the forest spirit caused a manikou from the bush to chew on the vines and set the man free. Meanwhile, the two kidnappers began to quarrel as to who would take the woman home. A fight broke out, and one chopped the other with an axe and killed him. Seeing the violence he was capable of, the woman pretended to be willing to go home with the killer. In the meantime, the husband set about searching for his wife. He walked along the shore for a good distance until he came to a house. He was afraid to enter, but the house owner welcomed him and gave him food. The husband related how he had lost his wife. Now, the householder was really a Maboya and knew what he heard was the truth. He told the man to shut his eye, and when he opened them again, another person was there. Go with this friend, said the housemaster, and you will surely find your wife. They traveled far and reached a village. He became tired and made a tent and slung hammocks and rested. While they were resting, the kidnapper and his captive passed. Look, there is my husband, she exclaimed. But the kidnapper said it could not be so, as he must have surely died at sea. However, he went closer to make sure, and there was the husband fast asleep. He did not see the spirit, as he was invisible to all except the husband, for the gods had so instructed. The abductor chopped the husband into many pieces with his axe, but the spirit made him whole again. The next day, the wicked man passed again, and the same thing happened. On the third day, still seeing the husband alive, the captor decided to burn the pieces, but the spirit collected the ashes and made him whole again. The resurrected husband, heeding the advice of the spirit, then went and destroyed the wife thief with his axe. The wife thief friends tried to piece him together, but only the honest and the righteous can be restored to life, and only the gods and the spirits can do so. The husband and his wife were reunited. They returned to their village, vowing never to leave, regardless of the hardships that they may encounter. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Mutilal. Any comments? I believe that Arlene's clapping. I believe that that type of story is exactly the type that he said should be shared. So I know as writers it costs to publish, but you know, we have access to Amazon. So maybe even if we take a small story like that and we're able to publish it on Kindle, to put it up to just get it out there. So something you may want to consider. I know it takes time and money and energy and effort, but it's a great way to be able to carry on our culture.
Well, Al Ramsawak he told me that story because we used to be together a lot of time, whether in poetry and prose at the library, or I used to take him around and all that. He taught me at high school. So that is a story that he was doing some research. Unfortunately, passed away in 2019. So that is story from then.
Okay.
Thanks for indulging me.
No, but it could be a story that you know you carry on the torch for him, you finish it for him. All right, I'll go ahead and call on Heather. I know Mutila looking like I'm giving him work. But
Well, you know,
welcome. You have the floor.
thank you. Well, you know, besides Carnival, Doubles, the Pitch Lake, you know, these unique things that we have given to the world, a recent addition to that list is the 1969 discovery of the Banwani Man, 5,000-year-old archaeological site of his burial along in, I think it's in Pinal, isn't it, Moti?
San Francisco.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I wrote a poem, you know, called Banwani Man. Over
San
half a millennia
Franciscan
ago.
Banwari Trace.
Banwari Trace.
Yeah, Alisa Janki has done some research on that, and she has written on that.
Yeah. Okay, Banwari Man. Over half a millennia ago, you died. They buried you with pomp in a seashell-lined grave. You lay sleeping. You had a life once, a name now forgotten in the distant mists of time. You lay for eons undisturbed. Only the birds you heard singing and the trees rustling in the tropic breezes. Day into night and night into day again for centuries. Time began the march of history. People came and went. Arawaks, Caribs, the Spanish sailed to shore bringing death. French took land. The British too claimed their stake in the island riches. They brought Africans as slaves. That darkness came too. Then Indians from India came as servants of the empire to Trinidad, land of sugar. The Chinese came as merchants, the Jews as refugees. Karyani became a melting pot. In Pinal, Indians settled, building lives in carrot houses with leafade walls, erected Hindu temples and Muslim mosques, planted gardens of rice, cocoa, and cane, scratching a life in the soil. A village sprang up, a market came to life. Bare feet made worn footpaths, which became traces, linking all to one another, with names from India: Gopi, Suchit, Laltu, Banwari, and more. And therein lies the miracle. By chance, your resting place discovered along Banwari Trace, a footpath named for the Hindu god Lord Krishna, brought across the Kalapani to the New World. Today, you're famous, your resting place a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the oldest such grave in the Caribbean. Today, you are not nameless. You are known across the globe by Lord Krishna's name. You are now Banwari Man. Your grave became a shrine to antiquity, to a vanished world, lost in the mists of history. But you, like Egypt's pharaohs, you've resurfaced, a symbol of those upon whose shoulders we now build our imperfect world. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Any comments?
Yes, thank you. You take me by surprise there, that Banwari is another name for Lord Krishna. I thought
Yeah.
I alone knew that on the program.
But let's do my homework,
But indeed, here there's a particular, what we call a bhajan, Banwari re jine ka sahara tera naam re. But I'll leave that for next time.
All right. If there are no other comments, Heather, thank you so much for that poem. It was really lovely.
Thank
And
you.
I hope, even I looked up online, I think the minimum word count for something on Kindle is 5,000 words. But if we could compile maybe something around the Fizz people, maybe we can put something out there. I'm not
I think
buying
it's
books
so
this
important
time for
after today.
anyone.
Yeah.
I'm not buying books or bringing it in, but at least it will be out there for,
Yeah.
digitally. So with that, if there are any other comments or any last words, it is 3:26. I'm amazed that we had same count of persons from beginning to end. So thank you all for staying after 3 o'clock. I know some of you have delayed your Sunday lunch. And I appreciate that. And with that, I guess we will close. So I'm going to go ahead and close the meeting. Thank you so much. And we have our Kamta Prasad coming up on, what's the date, Muti? The 16th, I
On the
believe?
19th of April in the library,
19th of
I have already
April.
sent out the readings for everybody, so I'll be communicating with them during the week. And with that, I'm going to have my late lunch.
Bye-bye, everyone.